The modiste and the matriarch, a stitch in time. In the winter of 1861, as the United States stood on the precipice of a fratricidal war, two women met in the shadows of the White House. One was the most powerful woman in the country, plagued by grief and public scorn. The other had bought her own freedom with a needle and thread, carrying the scars of a lash on her back. What followed was a relationship that defied every social law of the 19th century. A bond of secrets, silk, and a blood-stained cloak that would change the way history remembers the Lincoln presidency. The woman who bought herself. To understand the gravity of this relationship, one must first understand Elizabeth Keckley. Born into bondage in Virginia in 1818, Elizabeth's early life was a gauntlet of trauma. She was beaten, moved from master to master, and suffered the indignity of a forced relationship that resulted in a son. Yet Elizabeth possessed a genius of the hands. She was a master seamstress. By the time she moved to St. Louis, she was supporting her master's entire family with her sewing. In a feat of incredible willpower, she negotiated her own price, $1,200. In today's currency, that was a fortune. Through the patronage of her wealthy clients, she raised the funds and walked out of the courthouse a free woman. She didn't just want to be free, she wanted to be the best. She moved to Washington, D.C., and within months, she was the modiste, high-end dressmaker, to the wives of the political elite, including the wives of Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee. But her destiny was tied to a different name, Lincoln, the arrival of the Western Queen. When Mary Todd Lincoln arrived in D.C. in 1861, she was viewed as an outsider. The sophisticated socialites of the East looked down on her frontier Kentucky roots. Mary was anxious, grieving the recent death of her son Willie, and obsessed with her public image. She needed a wardrobe that commanded respect. Elizabeth Keckley was recommended. When they first met, Mary was impressed not just by Elizabeth's skill, but by her quiet, regal composure. Elizabeth became more than a dressmaker. She became Mary's confidant. As she fitted the silk bodices and adjusted the crinolines, Mary would pour out her heart behind the closed doors of the White House. The relationship was radical. In an era where Black women were relegated to the margins, Elizabeth was the only person Mary Lincoln truly trusted. Elizabeth spent hours in the private quarters of the White House. She was there when the president, Abraham Lincoln, would walk in, weary from the news of battlefields like Antietam and Gettysburg. The dynamics, the emotional anchor. While Mary was prone to mercurial moods and fits of temper, Elizabeth was the calm in the storm. The shared grief. Both women lost sons during the war years. This shared maternal tragedy bonded them in a way that transcended race and status. The financial secret. Mary Lincoln was a compulsive shopper, racking up thousands of dollars in debt for clothes to maintain her status. Elizabeth was the only one who knew the true extent of this debt, often acting as a buffer between Mary and the president. The night at Ford's Theater. On April 14th, 1865, the trajectory of their lives shattered. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Mary Lincoln fell into a state of near catatonic grief. In her darkest hour, she didn't call for her family or her cabinet members. She called for Elizabeth. Elizabeth stayed with Mary in the White House for weeks after the assassination, packing her trunks and mourning with her. It was Elizabeth who handled the Great Clothes Scandal when Mary tried to sell her old dresses to pay off her debts, a move that scandalized the nation. The betrayal and the legacy. The astonishing part of this relationship comes at the end. In 1868, Elizabeth published her autobiography, Behind the Scenes, or 30 Years a Slave and 4 Years in the White House. She wrote it to defend Mary Lincoln's reputation against critics, but the book backfired. It contained private letters and intimate details of the Lincoln household. The public was outraged that a servant would dare reveal the private lives of the first family. Mary Lincoln felt utterly betrayed. She never spoke to Elizabeth again. Elizabeth Keckley died in 1907 in a home for destitute women and children. very home she had helped fund during her years of success. Mary Lincoln died in 1882, lonely and misunderstood.